I'm Marianne, 29 years old, and 3 months ago, my daughter Sophie spent days planning a surprise 70th birthday dinner for my mother, her beloved grandmother. She cooked 18 elaborate French dishes from scratch, decorated our little home like a fine dining bistro, and poured her heart into every detail. 5 hours before guests were due, I got a text. "We've moved the party to the sovereign table, adults only." Sophie wasn't invited. She'd been erased. That moment shattered something in me, not just for her, but for every quiet hurt I'd endured growing up in a family obsessed with image over love. Before I share how we turned that betrayal into something unforgettable, let me know where you're watching from. And hit like if you've ever had to stand up for someone you love when no one else would. My mother, Evelyn Sterling, came from what people politely called old money. Think names on university wings, trust funds that stretch back generations, and an inherent belief that their family tree was somehow more robust, more deserving than anyone else's. Her entire identity, her very breath, revolved around social climbing and maintaining an impeccable facade. Every charity board she served on, every exclusive country club membership she pursued, was meticulously scrutinized. Our family vacations, my brother and sister's achievements, my own milestones, they were all curated, polished, and presented to project an image of effortless perfection. The underlying message was clear. Our worth was directly tied to how well we fit into and elevated their social standing. My father, Victor Sterling, on the other hand, built his wealth from scratch. He started with one modest commercial property development in his 20s and expanded it into a sprawling empire of shopping centers and office complexes across 3 states. His success was undeniable, impressive even, but it came with an obsession about appearances that perfectly mirrored my mother's. Their universe revolved around impressing others, their friends, their business associates, even strangers they'd never see again. Their validation was purely external, a constant need for applause and admiration, and they raised me to follow that same, exhausting blueprint. Growing up, their love felt like a constantly shifting target. When I brought home straight A's, won regional debate championships, or dated the son of Victor's most influential business partner, they would beam with pride, their praise lavish and immediate. But the moment I struggled in advanced calculus, quit the competitive swimming team, or expressed an interest in pursuing a career in library science instead of corporate law, their disappointment was palpable, a heavy silence that pressed down on me. "Marianne, stand up straight, Mrs. Beaumont is watching," my mother would whisper at social gatherings, her voice a razor's edge of anxiety. "Did you have to wear that? The Caldwells are bringing their son," my father would comment, his gaze sweeping over my outfit before dinner parties, his disapproval hanging in the air. Every accomplishment was measured against how it reflected on them. Every perceived failure was a personal embarrassment they couldn't afford to display. I internalized this message deep in my bones for years, truly believing that my worth, my very identity, was inextricably linked to external validation. When I was 28, the carefully constructed life I had built around their expectations imploded. My marriage to Julian Thorne, a successful investment banker, whom my parents adored for his pedigree and prospects, ended after 4 years. The divorce itself was amicable, a quiet dissolution of a partnership that never quite found its footing, but it was devastating nonetheless. The real shock came when I discovered I was 2 months pregnant, just as the final papers were being signed. My parents' reaction was in hindsight predictable. My mother, Evelyn, immediately burst into tears, her first words a wail of "What will people say?" My father, Victor, paced the living room, his face etched with worry about the family name. Neither of them seemed remotely concerned about my emotional state, the grief of a lost marriage, or the terrifying challenges of impending single motherhood. Evelyn, in a particularly chilling moment, actually suggested I might want to consider options, a veiled reference to abortion that I shut down immediately, my voice trembling but firm. I was keeping my baby, no matter what. The birth of Sophie shifted something, albeit subtly, in our family dynamic. My parents initially viewed her as living evidence of my failure, a single mother, a messy divorce, a deviation from their perfect script. But then, to everyone's surprise, Sophie became the unexpected joy in all our lives. Evelyn, my mother, particularly formed a bond with Sophie that astonished even me. Perhaps it was because Sophie was naturally gifted in ways Evelyn inherently valued, She was artistically inclined, musically talented, and socially adept, charming everyone she met without even trying. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the mantle of grandparent softened something in Evelyn that the pressures of parenthood had never quite allowed. Whatever the reason, Sophie adored her grandmother, and Evelyn, remarkably, seemed to genuinely love her in return. I did everything I possibly could to maintain healthy relationships between Sophie and my parents. I swallowed my own hurt when they would cancel our plans at the last minute for what they deemed more important social engagements. I smiled through their subtle, often cutting criticisms of my parenting choices. I pretended not to notice when they showered Sophie with obscenely expensive gifts, while simultaneously making snide comments about my modest home or my chosen career. "It's such a shame you're stuck in that tiny bungalow when you could have had so much more," Evelyn would sigh, sweeping her gaze disapprovingly around my comfortable but simple living room during their visits. "Teaching, I suppose it's fulfilling, even if the salary is modest," Victor would comment, emphasizing the last word as if it physically pained him to utter it. I had become a high school guidance counselor, a career that brought me genuine satisfaction, a deep sense of purpose in helping teenagers navigate their paths, but it was also a source of perpetual disappointment for my parents. In their eyes, I had wasted my potential and, worse, embarrassed them professionally. But the truth was, my work gave me purpose in a way their approval never had. Despite this complicated history, Sophie and Evelyn developed a truly special relationship. They shared a love of classical music, vintage fashion, and French cuisine. Evelyn would take Sophie to the symphony, to high tea at ridiculously fancy hotels, and occasionally on shopping trips that made me wince at the extravagance but smile at the pure joy on my daughter's face. It was this unique bond that made Evelyn's 70th birthday so incredibly significant to Sophie. It represented a chance for Sophie to give back to the grandmother who, despite her flaws, had shown her glimpses of unconditional love, a kind of love that, ironically, had never quite extended to me. The idea for the surprise birthday dinner first sparked in Sophie's mind about 3 months before Evelyn's birthday. We were having one of our monthly dinners at my parents' grand estate when Evelyn mentioned a French dish her own grandmother used to make for special occasions. Coq au vin. Evelyn sighed wistfully. Nobody makes it like grand-mère did, with those tiny pearl onions and the cognac flambéed right at the table. Such a production, but oh, what memories those dinners created. I saw the spark ignite in Sophie's eyes immediately. On the drive home, she couldn't stop talking about it. "Mom, I could learn to make all of Grandma's favorite childhood dishes. We could transform our house, make it really special. It would be like giving her back pieces of her own childhood." I hesitated, knowing the immense amount of work involved and, more dauntingly, my mother's exacting standards. "Honey, that's a beautiful thought, but that's a lot of cooking for 18 people. Maybe we could do something smaller?" Sophie shook her head, her jaw set firmly. "No, it has to be special. I've been saving from my bookstore job. I can afford the ingredients if we plan carefully." For the next 3 months, Sophie transformed. She became a culinary historian, contacting Evelyn's older cousin, Beatrice, to gather forgotten family recipes. She researched obscure techniques for dishes that hadn't been common since the 1950s. She created meticulous shopping lists, detailed budgeting spreadsheets, and precise preparation timelines. Watching her dedication touched me deeply. She worked extra shifts at the local bookstore, carefully setting aside money each week for ingredients. She practiced complicated techniques on weekends, mastering puff pastry, clarifying consommé, and perfecting the temperature for tempering chocolate. The week of the birthday, Sophie asked for 3 days off school, something my straight-A student had never done before. Her teachers, knowing her impeccable academic standing and the profound reason for her absence, graciously provided assignments in advance. The first day of cooking focused on desserts and items that could be frozen or prepared ahead. Sophie made a traditional opera cake with 20 thin layers of almond sponge, coffee buttercream, and chocolate ganache, a towering masterpiece. She prepared pâte à choux for cream puffs that would be assembled last minute, and she made homemade ice cream in Evelyn's favorite childhood flavor, butter pecan with ribbons of salted caramel. "Do you think the ice cream is too sweet?" Sophie asked, offering me a spoonful, her face smudged with flour, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but her eyes shining with intense purpose. "It's perfect," I assured her, truly amazed at her natural talent. Grandma will absolutely love it. The second day focused on sides, salads, and marinating the main dishes. Our refrigerator filled with containers of marinated meat, perfectly chopped vegetables, and carefully prepared sauces. Sophie moved through our kitchen with a surprising efficiency, consulting her detailed timeline hourly. She prepared a classic Waldorf salad, the kind that had been served at Evelyn's childhood country club. She made tiny cornichon and ham tartlets from a recipe that had appeared in my grandmother's favorite women's magazine in 1952. She spent hours forming miniature potato croquettes, each one perfectly shaped and ready for final frying. "These are Grandma's favorites," she explained, showing me delicate asparagus spears wrapped in prosciutto, a dish my great-grandmother used to serve at her bridge club luncheons. By the third day, our modest suburban bungalow had been utterly transformed. Sophie had rented linens in Evelyn's favorite shade of sapphire blue. She had arranged flowers in vintage crystal vases, borrowed from a kind neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. She had polished silver candlesticks that had been a wedding present to me, rarely used, now gleaming with renewed purpose. The dining room table was extended to its full length, both leaves inserted, barely fitting into the space. Sophie had created handwritten place cards for all 18 family members, decorating each with a small watercolor illustration personalized to the guest. For Evelyn's, she'd painted a miniature replica of the lakeside cottage where my mother had spent her idolized childhood summers. The pièce de résistance was the birthday cake, a magnificent three-tiered creation covered in pale blue fondant with handcrafted sugar flowers cascading down one side. Sophie had incorporated family photos, printed on edible paper, creating a beautiful timeline of Evelyn's life around the bottom tier. "Do you think she'll like it?" Sophie asked, adjusting a sugar rose, her brow furrowed with anxiety and hope. "Is it elegant enough?" My throat tightened with emotion. "Sophie, it's the most beautiful cake I have ever seen," I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. "She'll be absolutely overwhelmed." As evening approached, our home filled with the most mouth-watering aromas. The coq au vin simmered, releasing the rich scents of wine, herbs, and caramelized onions. The beef Wellington rested, its pastry golden and flaky, promising perfection. Tiny cheese gougere waited by the oven, ready to be baked at the last minute for maximum freshness. Sophie had just changed into a simple blue dress that matched the decor when my phone chimed with a text message. A message that would change everything. The text arrived at precisely 2:13 p.m., exactly 5 hours before the first guests were supposed to arrive. I was helping Sophie arrange the final decorations on the dining table, her little humming a soft, content melody in the background, when my phone pinged with my father's distinctive notification sound. Thinking he was confirming last-minute details, perhaps an arrival time, I glanced down casually. The message stared back at me, stark and brutal. "We've decided to celebrate at the Sovereign table instead. It's adults only. Sorry for the late notice." I stared at the screen, certain I had misunderstood. My breath hitched. I read it again and again. The words remained unchanged, their meaning undeniable. My parents had unilaterally, without a single word of consultation, changed plans for Evelyn's milestone birthday, without consulting us, without a shred of consideration for Sophie's monumental 3-day effort, and with barely an apology for the devastatingly late notice. A follow-up text appeared a second later, somehow making it worse. "You're welcome to join us at 8. Table for 20 at the Sovereign table. Black tie preferred." My hands began to shake uncontrollably as I tried to process the sheer audacity of what was happening. The Sovereign table was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind with a 6-month waiting list for a regular table, and entrees that cost more than a day's salary for me. Black tie preferred meant my father expected tuxedos and evening gowns, a full-on spectacle of wealth and status. And adults only meant Sophie, the person who had poured her heart and soul into this entire celebration, wasn't welcome. I immediately called my father, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried my mother with the same result. A cold dread began to spread through me. With trembling fingers, I opened social media. And that's when the true betrayal hit me. Post from 2 days earlier. My cousin Clarice sharing her excitement about the elegant birthday soiree at the Sovereign table. My Aunt Beatrice asking about appropriate gifts for a sophisticated evening out. They had planned this days ago. Everyone knew except us. I pieced together what had happened through scattered comments and responses on their posts. Evelyn's wealthy socialite friend, Mrs. Caldwell, had suggested the sovereign table after learning about our quaint home dinner. Mrs. Caldwell had connections with the owner and could secure the exclusive private dining room, despite the notorious waiting list. My mother, Evelyn, utterly unable to resist the allure of celebrating at the most prestigious venue in town, rather than her daughter's modest home, had eagerly accepted. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Once again, image and social status mattered more to my parents than genuine connection, than consideration, than love. The fact that it was at Sophie's expense, that it was her monumental effort and beautiful intentions being dismissed, made it unbearable. I stood in our beautifully decorated dining room, surrounded by every evidence of my daughter's love and labor, and felt a familiar, simmering anger rise within me. An anger I had suppressed countless times throughout my life. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about Sophie, and that made it infinitely worse. In that excruciating moment, I had to decide how to break the news to my daughter, who was in the kitchen, meticulously putting the final touches on the birthday cake. I could hear her humming softly, completely unaware that her efforts were about to be rendered utterly meaningless. I took a deep, shaky breath and walked into the kitchen. Sophie looked up, her face alight with a happy smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "Mom, what's wrong?" I showed her the text. I couldn't bring myself to soften the blow with platitudes or excuses. She deserved the unvarnished truth, even though I knew it would devastate her. Sophie read the message once, twice, 3 times, just as I had. Her expression didn't crumble dramatically. There were no immediate tears or outbursts. Instead, something far more heartbreaking happened. I watched as a quiet devastation washed over her features, followed by a resigned understanding that seemed far too mature for her 17 years. "Oh," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I see." That simple 2-word response broke me more than any tears could have, because I recognized it. It was the same quiet acceptance, the same practiced resignation I had perfected over decades of similar disappointments from my parents. The crushing realization that my own daughter had already learned to expect such dismissive treatment, to internalize that she wasn't quite enough, made my stomach churn with a sickening lurch. They must have had their reasons," Sophie said, her voice small but determined to be understanding, clinging to a thread of hope. She carefully set down the piping bag she'd been using on the cake. "Maybe Grandma preferred a restaurant, maybe—" "No," I interrupted firmly, my voice sharper than I intended, but filled with absolute conviction. "There's no excuse for this, honey, not for the last-minute notice. Not for excluding you, not for any of it." Sophie nodded, but I could see she was struggling to process the rejection, to reconcile it with the boundless love she had poured into this event. Her eyes swept across the kitchen, at the magnificent cake she'd spent hours decorating, at the containers of food prepared with such tender care, at the handwritten menu cards stacked neatly on the counter. "What did I do wrong?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible, and the question pierced straight through my heart. Because it was the exact question I had asked myself countless times throughout my childhood when faced with my parents' conditional approval. It was the internalized belief that if only I had been better, smarter, more accomplished, more socially adept, then perhaps I would have been worthy of their unconditional love. In that moment, watching history repeat itself with my daughter, something fundamental shifted inside me. The protective instinct that surged through me wasn't just about this specific incident. It was about breaking a generational pattern of emotional manipulation and conditional love. "You did absolutely nothing wrong," I said, taking her hands in mine, my grip firm. "Nothing. This isn't about you or anything you did or didn't do. This is about them and their priorities." Sophie nodded again, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. She glanced at the cake, Evelyn's smiling face from one of the edible photographs, and for a brief moment, her composure cracked. "I just wanted to make her happy," she whispered, a single solitary tear sliding down her cheek. That tear, that single quiet tear, was my breaking point. I had spent my entire life accommodating my parents' behavior, making excuses for their actions, protecting Sophie from the full brutal impact of their conditional love. But standing in our kitchen, surrounded by the undeniable evidence of my daughter's extraordinary effort and genuine, pure love, I knew something had to change. I couldn't control my parents' actions, but I could control how we responded to them. And I absolutely refused to let this moment become another permanent scar on Sophie's heart. My first instinct, a primal urge, was to call my parents back and unleash decades of suppressed frustration, to demand they acknowledge the profound hurt they'd caused, to insist they change their plans and honor Sophie's efforts. But as I looked at my daughter, still processing her disappointment with such quiet dignity, I realized confrontation wouldn't heal this wound. It might satisfy my anger temporarily, a fleeting moment of vindication, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue. Sophie needed to know her effort mattered, profoundly, beautifully, even if not to the intended recipients. I took a deep breath and made a decision that prioritized healing over confrontation. "Sophie," I said gently, my voice soft but firm, "let's sit down for a minute." We sat at our kitchen island, surrounded by the glorious fruits of her labor, the exquisite food, the beautiful decorations, the undeniable love poured into every single detail. "I'm furious with your grandparents right now," I admitted, choosing absolute honesty, letting her see my own raw emotion. "But I'm also incredibly proud of what you've accomplished here. This wasn't just about a party, it was about showing love through action, and that matters, regardless of how others respond." Sophie nodded, slowly wiping away the lone tear that had escaped. "I know," she whispered. I really wanted Grandma to see everything." "I understand," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "And I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, because it does. It's okay to feel disappointed and upset. Those feelings are completely valid." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the painful reality of the situation settle around us, the rich aromas of the uneaten feast filling the quiet space. Then I asked the question that would redirect our entire evening, our entire outlook. "So what do we do with all this amazing food you've prepared?" Sophie looked around, her eyes sweeping over the vast array of dishes. "I guess we could freeze some of it, or, I said, a nascent idea forming, a spark of defiance and hope. "We could still host a dinner, just for different guests, like who?" I thought about the Haven House, the local community center where I volunteered twice a month. It was a place that provided resources, meals, and fellowship for people from all walks of life. People who would genuinely appreciate a home-cooked meal prepared with such care and love. What if we called Linda at the Haven House, asked if we could host an impromptu dinner there tonight, for people who would truly appreciate your incredible cooking? I watched as Sophie considered the idea, a small spark, almost imperceptible at first, reigniting in her eyes. "We could do that?" she asked, her voice tinged with a fragile hope. "We absolutely could, and I bet we could find plenty of people to join us with just a few phone calls." Sophie glanced at the dining room, still set for 18, with our best china gleaming and the rented linens perfectly draped. "But what about all the decorations?" she asked, a practical concern. "We'll pack them up and take them with us," I said, a growing sense of purpose in my voice. "We'll transform the Haven House just like we did our dining room." For the first time since reading that devastating text, Sophie's lips curved into a small, tentative smile. That could actually be really nice," she admitted. I squeezed her hand. "It won't erase the hurt, honey. I won't pretend it will, but it might help us transform this disappointment into something truly meaningful." We sprang into action. I called Linda, the Haven House director, explaining our incredibly unusual situation and asking if we could use the space on such short notice. "Marianne, are you kidding me?" Linda responded, her voice immediately enthusiastic. "We'd be honored. The center is open until 9 tonight anyway for the weekly senior social, but only about 10 people usually come. Having a special dinner would be incredible." Her genuine excitement was like a balm to my raw nerves. Next, I reached out to my closest friends and neighbors, my best friend Tessa and her husband Eli. Immediately offered to help transport the food and decorations. My colleague Chloe, a fellow guidance counselor at the high school, promised to spread the word among the other teachers and staff. Our neighbor Leo, a retired chef known for his booming laugh and even bigger heart, volunteered to help serve and keep the hot dishes at perfect temperature. Within an hour, we had an overwhelming response. People weren't just willing to attend, they were eager to help, genuinely touched by Sophie's story and determined to make the evening special. As we carefully packed containers of food into coolers and meticulously boxed the elaborate cake, Sophie's spirits visibly lifted. Her movements became more purposeful, her expression more determined. "Mom," she said suddenly, looking up from wrapping the cream puffs in delicate parchment paper, "could we invite the residents from Golden Years Residence too? The ones who never get visitors?" Golden Years Residence was the assisted living facility where Sophie volunteered on weekends, reading to residents and helping with activity programs. Many of the residents rarely had family visits, and Sophie had developed a soft spot for them. "That's a beautiful idea," I said, feeling a surge of pride at my daughter's compassionate heart. "I'll call the activities director right now." While I made arrangements with Golden Years residents, Sophie called several of her favorite teachers. She hesitated before calling Mrs. Chen, her culinary arts teacher, who had provided guidance on some of the more complex recipes Sophie had attempted. "I'm nervous to tell Mrs. Chen," Sophie admitted, her brow furrowed. She was so excited about me making all these traditional French dishes for Grandma. "Honey," I reassured her, "Mrs. Chen will be impressed by your cooking regardless of who eats it. And I think she'll be even more impressed by how you're handling this situation." Sophie nodded, took a deep breath, and made the call. From her animated conversation and the relieved smile that followed, I could tell Mrs. Chen had responded with the kindness and support that made her such a beloved teacher. As we worked, I noticed Sophie's remarkable transformation. The initial devastation had given way to purposeful action. She wasn't just going through the motions. She was genuinely excited about the new plan. She began suggesting modifications to make the dinner even more special for our unexpected guests. "We should make sure everything is easily accessible for the seniors," she said, rearranging items in a cooler for easier access. "And maybe we could create little take-home packages of desserts for people to enjoy later." In the midst of packing, Tessa and Eli arrived to help. As we loaded their SUV with decorations and table settings, Tessa pulled me aside. "Marianne, how are you doing with all this?" she asked quietly, her eyes full of concern. "I know how much effort you both put into this." I glanced at Sophie, who was carefully explaining to Eli how to transport the delicate three-tiered cake. "I'm angry at my parents," I admitted, my voice low, raw. "But watching Sophie transform her disappointment into something beautiful, I am just incredibly proud of her." Tessa squeezed my arm. "She learned that resilience from you, you know," she said softly. Her words caught me off guard. Had I modeled resilience, or had I inadvertently modeled tolerance of poor treatment? The distinction suddenly seemed crucially important. By 6:00 p.m., the time the original guests should have been arriving at our home, we were instead setting up at the Haven House. Volunteers had helped transport everything, and the transformation was remarkable. The center's simple multi-purpose room now featured elegant table settings, lush floral arrangements, and soft lighting from the candles Sophie had carefully selected earlier. As we put the finishing touches on the space, I watched my daughter, still flower-smudged, her hair a bit wild, direct volunteers with an unexpected confidence and grace. When the first Golden Years residents began to arrive, I saw Sophie straighten her shoulders and smile, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. In that moment, I realized we weren't just salvaging a ruined evening. We were creating something far more meaningful than the original plan could ever have been. The community center transformed from a utilitarian space into something magical in record time. The drab folding tables were covered with the sapphire blue linen Sophie had rented. The mismatched community center chairs disappeared under crisp white chair covers, instantly elevating the look. Twinkle string lights were hung along the walls, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. At 6:30 p.m., the first guests began to arrive. Residents from Golden Years Residence, most in their 80s and 90s, some using walkers or wheelchairs, all dressed in their finest clothes for what they'd been told was a special surprise dinner. Mr. Harrison, an 85-year-old veteran with no remaining family, arrived wearing a suit that hung loosely on his thin frame, a faded military medal pinned to his lapel. "Young lady," he said to Sophie as she greeted him at the door, her smile radiant. "I haven't worn this suit since my grandson's wedding 5 years ago, but they said a beautiful girl had prepared a fancy dinner, so I had to dress appropriately." Sophie's face flushed with pleasure as she escorted him to a seat at the head table. "I'm so glad you wore it, Mr. Harrison. You look very handsome." Next came the Davises, a young couple with 3 small, wide-eyed children who had been going through significant financial hardship after Mr. Davis lost his job. Mrs. Davis had tears in her eyes as she took in the elegant setting. "We haven't been able to eat out in months, she whispered to me, her voice trembling. The children are so excited. They've been practicing their restaurant manners all afternoon. Miss Chen, Sophie's culinary arts teacher, arrived with her elderly mother. She immediately sought out Sophie, enveloping her in a warm, comforting hug. "I'm so proud of you," I overheard her say, her voice thick with emotion, "not just for the cooking, but for your gracious spirit. That's the true mark of a chef, adaptability and generosity." By 7:00 p.m., the room was filled with an eclectic, vibrant mix of people. Seniors from Golden Years residents, regular attendees of the Haven House programs, teachers from Sophie's school, neighbors, friends, and even a few of my own counseling students who wanted to support us. What struck me most was the genuine atmosphere. Unlike the carefully orchestrated social events my parents preferred, where conversations were strategic and appearances paramount, this gathering buzzed with authentic connection. People who might never have met were chatting like old friends. Age, socioeconomic status, and background melted away in the warmth of shared humanity. When all 43 guests had arrived, far more than the original 18, Sophie stood nervously to welcome everyone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice initially shaky but growing stronger with each word. "This dinner was originally planned for my grandmother's 70th birthday, but plans changed unexpectedly. Instead, I'm honored to share it with all of you." The sincerity in her voice touched everyone. There was no need to explain further. Most already knew the backstory through the rapid community grapevine. "Everything you'll eat tonight has a story behind it," Sophie continued, a confident smile now gracing her lips. "These are dishes from my grandmother's childhood, recipes that have been in our family for generations. I hope you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed preparing them for you." As the serving began, with Sophie's friends from school volunteering as servers, I watched nervously for people's reactions to the sophisticated menu. Would the coq au vin be too exotic? Would the delicate asparagus spears wrapped in prosciutto seem too pretentious for this diverse group? My concerns dissolved as I witnessed the genuine, unadulterated appreciation on every face. Mr. Harrison closed his eyes in bliss after tasting the beef Wellington. "Young lady," he called out to Sophie, his voice booming across the room, "I haven't had food this good since Paris in 1960, and I dare say yours might be better." The Davis children, initially intimidated by the formal place settings, were now exclaiming with delight over the tiny cheese gougere. "It's like eating a cloud," the youngest exclaimed, her face smeared with cheese. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman from the Haven House's English language program, approached Sophie with tears in her eyes. "In my country, before I came to America, my mother made special meals like this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have given me back a memory I thought was lost." Throughout the evening, people kept approaching Sophie with compliments, questions about recipes, and expressions of profound gratitude. I watched as my daughter blossomed under their genuine appreciation. There was no pretense here, no social obligation driving their praise, just honest enjoyment and heartfelt gratitude. When it came time for dessert, Sophie hesitated briefly before bringing out the elaborately decorated birthday cake. She had removed the Happy 70th Birthday Evelyn inscription, but kept the timeline of photos, which now served as a conversation piece rather than a personalized tribute. "This was meant to be a birthday cake, Farah," she explained as people admired the craftsmanship. "But I think it works perfectly as a celebration of community." Harrison, who had become something of an honored guest at the head table, stood shakily, raising his water glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice wavering slightly but clear. "To Sophie, who turned disappointment into a gift for all of us, and to community, the family we choose." "To community," everyone echoed, raising their glasses, a symphony of clinking glasses filling the room. As people enjoyed the magnificent cake and other desserts, someone connected a phone to the center's speaker system, playing gentle jazz standards, the kind of music that appealed to all generations present. Mr. Albright, a spry 92-year-old from Golden Years residence, asked Mrs. Chen to dance, and soon a small dance floor had formed in the corner. The Davis children organized a boisterous game of musical chairs for the younger attendees, while some of the seniors taught Sophie's school friends how to play bridge at one of the tables. The barriers that typically separate people, age, background, circumstance, seemed to simply dissolve as the evening progressed. I found myself sitting with Tessa, watching Sophie move through the room, checking that everyone had enough food, engaging in deep conversations, and absolutely glowing with the pure joy of serving others. "Look at her," Tessa said softly, her eyes shining. "I don't think I've ever seen her this confident." "I know," I replied, feeling a complex mix of emotions: pride, a lingering ache for what had been lost, and a profound gratitude for what had been found. "She's found something here that she wouldn't have experienced at the original dinner." As the evening extended well beyond the planned end time, no one seemed eager to leave. I noticed Sophie deep in conversation with Mr. Harrison. He appeared to be describing something with animated hand gestures, and she was taking notes on a napkin. Later, she explained excitedly, "Mr. Harrison was a chef in the army. He's teaching me his secret recipe for the perfect gumbo. He says it's been in his family for generations, but he has no one to pass it on to." That moment crystallized the unexpected gift of the evening, new connections that would never have formed otherwise. Sophie wasn't just serving food, she was collecting stories, forming relationships, and experiencing the genuine appreciation her efforts deserved. By the time we started packing up at nearly 10 o'clock p.m., 3 hours later than planned, Sophie was exhausted, but radiating happiness. As volunteers helped clean up, people kept approaching to thank her, to request recipes, to invite her to cook for other community events. The Davis children had carefully packed take-home containers for everyone. Sophie's idea, ensuring that the seniors from Golden Years residents would have another delicious meal the next day. As we loaded the last of our supplies into Tessa's car, Sophie turned to me, her eyes bright despite her exhaustion. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice full of a peaceful contentment, "I'm really glad things turned out this way." And in that moment, I realized that while we couldn't control how others treated us, we had complete control over how we responded. My daughter had chosen generosity over bitterness, community over exclusivity, and authentic connection over social performance. In doing so, she taught me a lesson I'd been struggling to learn my entire life. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. People had posted photos and videos of the community dinner across social media, tagging Sophie and praising her culinary talents and generous spirit. Our local neighborhood page featured several posts about the amazing young chef and her heartwarming community feast. I scrolled through dozens of comments, smiling at the genuine appreciation people had expressed. Mrs. Chen had posted a particularly touching tribute. "As a culinary arts teacher, I occasionally encounter students with exceptional talent. Rarely do I encounter students with exceptional character. Sophie possesses both in abundance. Last night, she demonstrated grace under pressure, turning personal disappointment into community joy. Her technical skills are impressive, but her heart is what will make her truly successful in life and in the culinary world." Sophie was still sleeping, exhausted from 3 days of intense cooking and the emotional roller coaster of the previous day, when my phone rang with my mother's distinctive, elegant ringtone. I hesitated before answering, still raw from yesterday's disappointment. "Hello, Mom," I answered, keeping my voice neutral, carefully masking the torrent of emotions churning within me. "Marianne," Evelyn began, her tone oddly strained, devoid of its usual, carefully cultivated warmth. I saw the posts about some sort of community dinner." Of course she had. Evelyn monitored social media meticulously, concerned always with family appearance and social standing. "Yes," I replied simply, offering no further explanation, no softening of the blow. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "It looked nice. Very charitable of you both." The word charitable, with its implication of noblesse oblige, of condescending generosity, rather than genuine connection, ignited the anger I'd been controlling for so long. "It wasn't charity, Mom," I said, my voice firm, though it trembled slightly. "It was community, and it happened because Sophie spent 3 days cooking an elaborate birthday dinner for you, only to be told 5 hours before that you decided on the sovereign table instead, with no children allowed." Another silence, then a hint of defensiveness, a crack in her polished facade. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell pulled strings to get us the private room at the sovereign table. It was quite exclusive. We could hardly say no." "Actually, you could have," I interrupted, surprising myself with my newfound firmness. You could have said, my granddaughter has been planning a special dinner for months. We're committed to that. Marianne, be reasonable, Evelyn said, her voice rising in irritation. It was the sovereign table. The waiting list is… I don't care if the waiting list is 3 years long, I interrupted, my voice gaining strength, my suppressed anger finally breaking through the surface. Sophie put her heart into that dinner for you. I heard muffled voices on their end. Then my father, Victor, came on the line, his voice taking on the authoritative, dismissive tone he'd used throughout my childhood whenever I dared to challenge him. Marianne, this is ridiculous. You're making a scene over nothing. Evelyn had a lovely birthday. You chose not to join us. That was your decision. No, Dad, I retorted, my voice steady, fueled by a righteous anger I had never allowed myself to feel before. You excluded your only granddaughter from her grandmother's birthday celebration after she spent 3 days cooking a gourmet meal specifically designed around Mom's favorite childhood foods. That was your decision. Now see here. Gerald's voice took on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when I dared to challenge him. I don't appreciate you airing family business all over social media. It's embarrassing. Something snapped inside me. Decades of accommodating their behavior, of making excuses for their conditional love, of prioritizing their comfort over my own well-being. It all crystallized into perfect, blinding clarity. What's embarrassing, I said, my voice steadied, calm despite my racing heart, is how you've consistently valued appearances over relationships. How you've repeatedly shown Sophie that your social standing matters more than her efforts and her love. How you've created a pattern of disappointment that she's starting to accept as normal, just like I did for years. That's absolutely… Victor began, sputtering in disbelief. I'm not finished, I continued, surprising myself with my assertiveness, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. For years, I've made excuses for your behavior. I've pretended it didn't hurt when you canceled plans last minute for more important engagements. I've smiled through your criticisms of my home, my career, my parenting. I've done everything possible to maintain a relationship between you and Sophie because I thought having grandparents in her life, even flawed ones, was better than no grandparents at all. I took a deep breath before continuing, my voice cracking slightly with emotion, but remaining firm. But yesterday crossed a line, and I won't allow Sophie to normalize the kind of conditional love I grew up with. She deserves better. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. What are you saying, Marianne? I'm saying that moving forward, our relationship needs to change, I articulated clearly, concisely. I'm setting boundaries. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to demonstrate, through actions, not words, not gifts, not social opportunities, that you value Sophie for who she is, not how she makes you look. This is a bar, my father interjected, his voice returning to its dismissive growl. We've given that girl everything, the clothes, the music lessons, the things. You've given her things, I interrupted, my voice unwavering. What she needed was your presence, your genuine interest, your willingness to show up for her, even when it didn't align with your social calendar. The conversation continued in circles for what felt like an eternity, my parents alternating between outright defensiveness, minimization of the situation, and occasional fleeting glimpses of genuine confusion about my perspective. It was clear that they truly didn't understand the impact of their actions, that their worldview was so utterly centered around external validation that they couldn't comprehend prioritizing authentic relationships over superficial appearances. By the end of the call, nothing was explicitly resolved, no apologies were offered, no grand gestures made, but something had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. I had spoken my truth, clearly and unequivocally, and set firm boundaries for the first time in my life. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called Sophie directly. I offered my daughter privacy for the conversation, but she shook her head, putting the phone on speaker as we sat together on the couch. Sophie, darling, Evelyn began, her voice attempting its usual, carefully cultivated warmth. I wanted to check on you. Your mother seems quite upset about yesterday. Sophie met my eyes, seeking guidance, but I simply nodded, encouragingly. This was her relationship, her hurt, her opportunity to express herself. I was disappointed, Grandma, Sophie said simply, directly, cutting through the pleasantries. I worked really hard on that dinner for you. Yes, well, these things happen, Evelyn quickly glossed over. Social obligations, you understand. When you're older. I'm not sure age has anything to do with it, Grandma, Sophie interrupted gently, but with a surprising steel in her voice. It's about priorities, isn't it? The wisdom in her response, echoing the very realizations I'd just come to, made my heart swell with pride. Well, Evelyn seemed genuinely flustered, caught off guard by Sophie's calm logic. We had a lovely evening at the Sovereign table. Perhaps you could make those dishes for us another time. A private dinner, maybe. Perhaps, Sophie replied, her tone non-committal, neither accepting nor rejecting, but also not rushing to accommodate. But I'm actually thinking of starting a monthly community dinner at the center. Mr. Harrison and some of the other seniors want to teach me their family recipes. I watched as Sophie subtly but firmly established her own boundary, not cutting off her grandmother entirely, but certainly not rushing to accommodate her old expectations either. In the days that followed, various family members reached out, having heard distorted versions of the story through the rapid family grapevine. Some were defensive of my parents, citing their generosity and status in predictable ways. Others, surprisingly, expressed support. My sister Olivia called midweek, her voice unusually hesitant. I should have said something when Mom changed the plans, she admitted, her voice low. I knew about Sophie's dinner. It didn't feel right, but you know how they are. I do know, I agreed, a sense of solidarity forming between us. That's why I'm finally saying something. It's brave, Olivia said after a pause. I'm not sure I could do it. Her words made me realize that setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting Sophie. It was about breaking generational patterns that had affected my entire family. The week following the incident was emotionally exhausting but ultimately clarifying. Establishing boundaries with parents who had never respected them resulted in predictable pushback, guilt trips, attempts at manipulation, and feigned misunderstandings. But watching Sophie process the experience with such maturity gave me strength. I'm still sad about what happened, she confided one evening as we prepared dinner together, a simple meal after the elaborate cooking marathon of the previous week. But I keep thinking about Mr. Harrison saying he hadn't had a home-cooked meal like that in years, and the Davis kids being so excited about the fancy desserts. It felt really good to make people happy. You did more than make them happy, I told her. You created connection. That's a rare and valuable gift. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand something now, Mom, about Grandma and Grandpa. What's that? I prompted, curious. They're so busy trying to impress people that they miss actually connecting with them, she said, her young face etched with an unexpected insight. And that seems really lonely. Her insight, so compassionate even in the face of her own hurt, moved me deeply. My daughter had grasped something that had taken me decades to understand. That my parents' behavior stemmed not from strength, but from insecurity. Not from malice, but from a fundamental misunderstanding of what truly matters in life. As the week progressed, I noticed small, tentative shifts in Evelyn's communication. Texts that seemed less performative, questions that appeared more genuinely interested in Sophie's activities. Whether these represented real change or merely tactical adjustments remained to be seen. But for the first time, I wasn't anxiously trying to interpret and accommodate their behavior. I was simply observing it, responding authentically, and maintaining the boundaries I'd established. It was uncomfortable, it was occasionally painful, but it was also, in its own profound way, liberating. 1 month after the birthday dinner incident, subtle but significant shifts had occurred in our family dynamics. Evelyn had begun making tentative, almost awkward efforts to repair her relationship with Sophie. She called more regularly, asked questions about Sophie's interests, her schoolwork, her new cooking projects, and even attended one of her school choir performances, sitting quietly in the audience without drawing attention to herself. This was a notable departure from her usual behavior, which always involved a grand entrance and discreet critiques. Victor remained more resistant to change. His communication was still primarily focused on material things, offering to buy Sophie a new laptop, or suggesting exclusive summer programs rather than genuine connection. But even he showed small signs of awareness, occasionally asking about the community dinners that had become Sophie's passion project. Those monthly dinners had transformed from an impromptu solution into a deeply meaningful tradition. The Haven House had officially partnered with Sophie to host Family Table, a monthly event where people from all walks of life shared a meal together. Each dinner featured recipes contributed by community members, with Sophie coordinating a team of volunteer cooks. The confidence I observed in my daughter now was remarkable. She moved through the kitchen with authority, teaching seniors and children alike how to prepare had prepared dishes from various cultures. Her natural teaching ability reminded me of myself, though her culinary talents far exceeded mine. "Mom, Mr. Harrison taught me his grandmother's gumbo recipe today," she announced excitedly after one volunteer session. "He said it's a family secret, but since he considers me honorary family now, I'm allowed to know it." These new connections, this chosen family that had formed around shared passions and genuine appreciation, had healed the wound of rejection in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sophie wasn't just recovering from disappointment, she was thriving because of the new path it had revealed. One Wednesday evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Sophie casually mentioned that she had decided on her focus for college. "I want to study culinary arts with a focus on food anthropology," she said, rinsing a plate, her voice calm and assured. "Learning the cultural and historical significance of traditional recipes, maybe eventually write a cookbook about immigrant family recipes and the stories behind them." "That sounds perfect for you," I replied, genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness and depth of her plan. "Your work at the community center has really shaped this vision, hasn't it?" Sophie nodded. "If Grandma had shown up for that birthday dinner, I might still be focused on fancy French cuisine and impressing people. Now I understand that food is really about connection and preservation of culture. Mr. Harrison taught me that. Mrs. Rodriguez, too." The wisdom in her observation struck me deeply. What had begun as a painful rejection had redirected Sophie's talent and passion towards something far more meaningful than impressing elite social circles. She was developing a culinary philosophy grounded in community and cultural appreciation, rather than exclusivity and status. As spring advanced towards summer, Sophie received an unexpected opportunity. A local newspaper had covered one of her community dinners, and a representative from a prestigious culinary school in New York contacted her about their summer program for promising young chefs. "They're offering me a scholarship," she explained, showing me the email, her eyes wide with disbelief and excitement. 2 weeks of intensive training with a focus on traditional techniques from around the world. "That's incredible," I exclaimed, reading the glowing invitation. "Will you accept?" Sophie bit her lip thoughtfully. "I want to, but it overlaps with Grandma's big annual charity gala weekend," she mentioned, hoping I'd attend. I studied my daughter's face, recognizing the familiar conflict there, the desire to pursue her passion versus the lingering, almost innate hope for her grandmother's approval. In that moment, I realized how much healthier our family dynamics had truly become. Sophie wasn't automatically sacrificing her opportunity for Evelyn's preferences. She was weighing her options thoughtfully, considering her own needs and growth. "What are you thinking?" I asked, careful not to influence her decision, but simply to listen. "I'm thinking that Grandma's gala happens every year, but this opportunity is special," she said slowly, her voice gaining conviction. "And I think part of respecting myself is prioritizing my growth sometimes." I nodded, my chest tightening with immense pride at her self-awareness. "I think that's very wise." When Sophie called Evelyn to explain her decision, I watched nervously, unsure how my mother would respond to not being the priority, to being told that something else was more important. To my surprise, Evelyn's reaction was measured. "Well, that sounds like a valuable opportunity," she said after a brief pause, her voice devoid of its usual manipulation. "Perhaps we could have lunch before you leave for New York. I'd like to hear more about this program." It wasn't effusive support by any means, but it was acceptance, a small but profoundly significant step toward a healthier relationship. As summer approached, our new normal continued to evolve. The boundaries I'd established created occasional tension, yes, but ultimately led to more authentic interactions. Instead of performing roles based on unspoken expectations, we were gradually learning to relate to each other as real, flawed human beings. One evening, after finishing preparation for the monthly community dinner, Sophie and I sat on our porch swing, enjoying the warm June air. "Mom," she said thoughtfully, gazing up at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. "I've been thinking about forgiveness a lot lately." "Oh?" I prompted, curious about her thoughts. "I was really hurt when Grandma and Grandpa bailed on the birthday dinner. I put so much of myself into that meal." She traced patterns on her glass of lemonade. "But I'm not angry anymore, not really." "That's a generous perspective," I noted, impressed. "It's not about them deserving forgiveness," Sophie clarified, her insight so mature for her 17 years. "It's about me not wanting to carry that hurt anymore, and realizing that they're limited by their own understanding of what truly matters." Her words moved me deeply, echoing my own decades-long journey towards understanding. Forgiveness, she instinctively understood, wasn't about excusing harmful behavior, but about freeing oneself from the burden of resentment. "Besides," she continued with a small smile, a glimmer of humor in her eyes, "if they hadn't canceled, I might never have met Mr. Harrison or started the community dinners. Sometimes disappointments lead to unexpected gifts." As I reflected on the journey of the past month, I realized that the painful incident had catalyzed growth for both of us. I had finally found the courage to establish healthy boundaries with my parents after decades of accommodation. Sophie had discovered a deeper, more meaningful purpose for her culinary talents and developed a resilience that would serve her throughout her life. We couldn't control how others treated us, even those who should love us unconditionally, but we could absolutely control how we responded to disappointment. We could choose bitterness or growth, isolation or community, resentment or creative transformation. The text that had initially shattered our plans had ultimately strengthened our spirits. The dinner prepared with such care had found its perfect recipients, even if they weren't the originally intended guests. And the love Sophie had poured into her cooking had returned to her multiplied, from the genuine appreciation of people who valued her efforts without condition. As the summer sun set behind our modest home, casting long shadows across our porch, I realized that this was the most valuable lesson I could have taught my daughter, that our worth isn't determined by others' validation, that genuine connection that matters more than social status, and that sometimes the most beautiful opportunities emerge from our greatest disappointments. If you've ever had to transform disappointment into something beautiful, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How did you handle a situation where plans fell through or someone let you down? What unexpected gifts came from that experience? Don't forget to hit that like button if Sophie's journey resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about resilience and growth, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that rejection can sometimes be redirection to something truly better. Thank you for being part of our community, and remember, the most meaningful connections often come when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities.